So, let's start with Stefan Mayer, the CEO of Phytoflow. He is from the canton of Ticino, then moved to Spain, where he co-founded Phytoflow. And this was the first company to receive approval for medical cannabis in Spain. During his activities, he received several subsidies from the EU for his research, and since 2019, he's been heading a project on the breeding on medical cannabis in Colombia, and they advise companies that want to grow medical cannabis. Then we have Sebastian Bakery, the ground of Cannabis. He's one of the leading European experts for the medical cannabis and Cbd industry, more than 10 years of experience in the breed production and regulation of cannabis. He made his degree in plant sciences in the Netherlands and co-founded one patients organization for medical cannabis in France. And by the way, 2014, the well-known Canna vape was created by him. Then Clifford Giesenow, CEO of JuicyFields, he has a degree and is the founder and advisor of many cannabis companies in South Africa and the founder of Cannabis Association of South Africa. And Viola Brugnatelli, 2018, she co-founded the Cannabiscienza. She's a neuroscientologist focusing on endocannabinoid and pharmacology, and she does research at the university in Padua, Italy, and her mission is to make her scientific knowledge about cannabinoids available to everyone. And now, Viola, the stage is yours.
Shall I? Oh, okay. Okay, so I assume he just told you that we're gonna talk to you and present to you like a few of different situations around the world. So my mission for today is going to try and attempt and give you a summary for the next 10 minutes, like honestly, a quickie with an Italian on these main topics. So available chemotypes are you're gonna find in the medical cannabis world in Italy. How does it work? How does it work the selling? How does it work the compounding in Italy? And what's the current situation? Where can we build from there? AKA, how bad is the situation right now? So in Italy, just a side note, in 2007, actually, we started with the allowance of THC as a molecule authorized for medical uses. But it's actually 2013 that is the year in which the whole medical cannabis boom starts. And as it started, the setup, the scenario was really promising. So we allowed, since 2013, the presence and coming of what we consider medical cannabis. So what's medical cannabis in Europe, in Italy, sorry? It's a EU GMP grown cannabis. Of course, it's grown by agamic reproduction. And also in Italy, we require that to be gamma radiated. So by those standards, at the time, we started importing exclusively by the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands, which the only supplier of the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands is Bedrocan. So basically, we started receiving all of our medical cannabis from Bedrocan since 2013. Then in 2015, we had a pretty important moment for regulation, which granted, for example, the first license for cultivation of medical cannabis in Italy, strangely enough, to the army. But this is the beginning of our sad story. And also the regulation in 2015 kind of opened up paths to a series of opportunities, especially for pharmacies. So since the first license in 2015, the army then managed to deliver the first batch of medical cannabis in Italy in 2017. And here is really where, like the mismatch between, the expectation of this wonderful magical world that can provide, rainbows and unicorns to patients. So finally, okay, we recognize this is a medicine. We get this medicine as properly as possible and deliver it through the pharmacies. So it was like a really good setup scenario. But unfortunately, being in Italy, the reality that we are witnessing over these past years has been horrible. And if I can summarize all the horrible things that happen, I think the worst is actually that we're leaving patients in a total shortage of a medical product in the pharmacy, a medical product that, as I said, it's allowed. So it's basically violation of our constitutional right to treat yourself. And why did we get here? This is like really fast forwarding you. We could get way more in details, but you'll find me around if you want. 2017 was like what we consider now, like, Second World War. Okay, that was the great blackout that we had. And it was a crazy year with a heavy shortage of medical cannabis. Fast forward, this heavy shortage prompted us to open up to the first tender that allowed for an import from another country of EU GMP cannabis. And again, this tender was actually brought about by the Ministry of Defense. The link with the army continues, right? And the first tender, there was really honestly, a fight of the big guys. And the really funny part was that nowhere in that tender was written that no Italian company could take part of it. But actually, by the criteria of how that thing was set up, no Italian company could take part of it, so realistically. So by the end of this fight, a Canadian, German company at the time was Pedanius, acquired by Aurora. But anyway, cannabis coming from Canada managed to win this tender, and the first 100 kilos of this cannabis came over to us in December 2018. But now I'm going to start and try and give you a little bit more numbers. Okay, so in 2019 was a slightly better year. So I fast forward to 2020, where basically there was a second round of tender. And strangely enough, the same company won again the tender. And this time around, we had the double amount allowance, so 200 kilos. But because, we just passed through a pandemic and there were so many little things that the Ministry of Health had to think about, they obviously came out with this brilliant new regulation in October 2020 that further restricted and really made even more complicated for the patients to access actually their medicine. But for instance, the pharmacy used to be able to send directly the product to the patient. Now, since October 2020, just because we went through a pandemic, this is not even possible anymore. So just trying to put even more obstacles on the way of the patient. And the main issue of this year is that last year, there were issues on production in many companies, really. And the army produced, instead of the supposedly 100 to 150 kilos that we needed for that year, they produced 30 kilos. Also, Bedrocan had a lot of problem last year, and we are totally bound to the import from Bedrocan. Now I'm going to show you how it works, the supply chain in Italy, so you get a better picture. But the reality was that we had such an oversaturation of demand that anything that came in February, which was the last supply that we had, was completely taken away and removed from the pharmacies in a matter of 3 months. So all the products that was there for 2021 was finished by the first quarter, and which led us to the situation that we are now in, which is basically having patients running around with prescriptions and not really knowing where to go because pharmacies are empty, which is one of the most sad part of actually having to witness this in this field. And also, usually we open up tenders in summer. So usually it's June, and then by March next year you get something. It's Italian times. But this June we didn't even open a tender. So really there is a very big question mark of how is this going to pan out actually for the future. And okay, theoretically, those are the varieties that we are offering to our patients. So as you can tell, mainly are dominant sativa varieties. Then, for example, if your patient is insomniac, then you only have one variety you can choose from, and if that company is not providing that variety, there is no way you're going to supply or give a continuity of care to people. At the moment, the only two things that, if you're really lucky, you can find is a Bedrocan 22 and a little bit of FM2. FM2 is just an acronym that means it is the acronym of the pharmaceutical military. So it's very creative. And this is important. For us, medical cannabis, it's a raw material, and we consider it a galenic ingredient. So then the pharmacist receives it, and then he can work it and compound it into something else. It can be a oil, a resin, or it can even just like dose it and separate it in different batches so that the patient can vaporize it by the dosage that the medical doctor assigned. So we consider it as a galenic compound. And how it's supplied to our pharmacist? 80% of our medical cannabis is coming from the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands, so basically from Bedrocan. And the import, as I said, started in 2007, but really that was a testing era, and then in 2013 was totally boosted. And because it was the early start, they managed to basically create this deal that they can deliver to 6 authorized distributors, which then can distribute to the pharmacies. Whilst the route of anything else, which means imported cannabis depending from a tender that is decided and open only by the Ministry of Health, then all of that cannabis is actually going through straight to the army. So it's not brought about by distributors. Distributors can only distribute Bedrocan, which is, again, one of the reasons behind us being in a total moment of scarcity, really. And then there is the production, the Italian production, so the internal production with the Italian army. And the numbers, again, here, like, for example, I told you the 2 tenders was 100 kilos, the first one, and 200 the second one. And then the average, supposedly average, that the armies should be able to provide is around 100 to 150 kilos per year. But how much really Italy needs? Like, what's the quantity that Italy needs? How many patients could use or benefit from cannabis? Well, we have different estimation on that, but today to you, I just want to put together like the INCB, the International Narcotic Control Bureau data. I'll show you that in a second. This is just a detail for whoever works like in the pharmacy world. The crazy, like, there are so many details about how and why it's just going so badly in Italy. But one of them is, for example, now, since 2015, we compelled pharmacists to sell €9 per gram, plus the 10% VAT, of course, cannabis. And these flowers, very often, especially in moment of scarcity, are bought by the same pharmacist around 10, 11 euros per gram. So you can imagine that's not very incentive for many pharmacists to basically not only work for free, but having to deal with a narcotic and actually occupying their lab and their instruments. So most of the time, it's something, usually you just find willing and volunteer pharmacists that just want to help patients rather than that's not a business, okay? So this is one of the reasons. As I told you earlier on as well, the import is bond by the tender, and this tender asks for a specific quantity. Let's say, okay, this year we can open up to 200 kilos, but those numbers are totally arbitrary and don't look at what's the requirement of the INCB. INCB, again, is the International Narcotic Control Bureau. They meet up in Vienna, and they're not exactly a group of hippies smoking joints all together and saying, you know, we need huge numbers. And those are the numbers of the INCB. And as you can tell, the expected max, what I mean with expected max is what the Ministry of Health in Italy expects for that year to be the quantity of cannabis that is going to be around. And the expectations, which seems to be always optimistic compared to the reality, they are really far from what's the number required and expected to be the consumption for medical patients from the INCB. And I think for 2020, actually, and 2021, we don't have the numbers yet, but I think we don't have them. Usually this is something that comes up on the Ministry of Health website. And I think one of the reasons that we don't have those numbers is because we know that the numbers are even worse than the previous years, because 2020, as everyone knew, hit us a lot and hit a lot of companies that were not able to stay on track with their production. So, okay. Quickly, before they kick me out from this place, I know all of you are interested about CBD, so just very briefly, what is CBD in Italy? CBD in Italy is just basically three things. So either is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, or is a cosmetic, or otherwise is we don't know what, technical use, which is everything else that you probably have heard by the marketing name of cannabis light. What is not CBD, and this is important, it's not a dietary supplement, it's not a food, it's not a novel food. And I think, because recently, this summer actually, our own IFA, which is our own FDA in Italy, also approved Epidiolex, the CBD containing oil from GW Jazz. I think that what we're seeing now, for example, recently, FDA denied the application of Charles Webb and Arwin Natural, and they applied to have their product, the CBD full spectrum, as supplements. They were denied on the basis of the same ingredients, so CBD, being part of a medication approved by the FDA, and so clearly there was an exclusion provision by the concept of the FDA, and so it could not pass through as a supplement. And I think something very similar to this is going to happen in Italy as well, because, as I said, this summer we approved Epidiolex by the IFA, and is also reimbursed by our healthcare, which flowers, for most part, in Italy are not reimbursed. And that's it. I am going to run away. What are the perspectives? Very briefly, the perspectives are gloomy and sad. So come and visit us, eat pizza, and don't come for medical cannabis because it's not the right place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Viola. If you give that to...
I go straight?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So after Italy, now time for France, which is our neighbor. And actually, we are not that advanced in the medical cannabis as they are, even so it's not going the right way. But in France, we are trying. So I'm going to go quickly over the French situation for medical cannabis and as well as the CBD industry, because it's also a very interesting market and very complicated. So I just want to start with a brief historical fact that in France we have quite some literatures of people talking about cannabis as medicine. The first one was François Rabelais. In his book Gargantua was talking about the hemp. As you can read, he was talking about it as the Pantagruelium. So that was the first one. Then we have also a famous botanist who actually was the first one to talk about the indica species. So that was Jean-Baptiste Pierre-Antoine Monet de Lamarck. Was 1783. We have the famous Club des Ashiciens with Dr. Moreau, who made some experiments on psychiatric using hashish and cannabis in different forms. That was actually the first doctor to publish about systematic work about drugs and its effect on the central nervous system. I'm trying to go fast because there's a lot to talk, but we don't have much time. We have Edouard Seguin, who actually was reporting to cure migraine and headache through cannabis. So he made an official publication on the medical record that was published. It was 1877. Then, 1 century after, in between, basically cannabis was excluded from the French pharmacopoeia. During Second World War in 1941, they actually forbidden the practice of herbalists, so pharmacy was not allowed to sell medicinal plant anymore. And from that time, basically nothing happened. Of course, it happened the International Convention, so cannabis became completely illegal. On the side, a huge industry regarding cannabis technical, so I will come back a little bit after, were French, regardless the international convention, they actually kept developing hemp sector, and they become one of the few producers of hemp seeds, and most of the countries who grow hemp will have a French variety, which is a complete paradox. And so here we comes in 2012, where I created the first medical cannabis association. Basically, we tried to put education models, so we were not so much focusing on activism, but more on education by making conferences, inviting top scientists like Professor Mechula, Professor Grothen-Hermann, Dr. Ethan Rousseau. And that was the beginning, let's say, of the understanding of what was medical cannabis, because in France, cannabis, as many parts in the world, is still stigmatized as something bad and evil, which is, I think, the other way around, but anyhow. So in 2000, from 2012 to 2019, so just before the pandemic, every year we are managing to organize those conferences with big names, bringing the science to the healthcare. And then from there, in between, Sativex was actually allowed in 2018. But there was something strange, because even so it was recognized as medicine, the Haute Autorité de Santé in France basically declared that the product didn't have like a purpose, really, so they just approved it because at the European level, other country has approved Sativex as medicine, so they had to actually approve it. So they just did the paperwork, but in practice, it was not accessible. It's still not accessible today because you need like a special authorization, so it's not just like on prescription, and it's not reimbursed. So altogether, it makes for patients impossible to reach. And that was 2018. Then after that, and through our conferences, we kind of wake up the mind of the health ministry, and they start to question themselves, okay, what is this about this medical cannabis? So they gather like a committee of health professionals, and for a 2 years period, basically, they interview so specialists or scientists in this particular field of cannabinoids. They also interview medical cannabis licensed producer from Canada. They interview patients. And after 2 years, they basically declare, okay, now it's time to go and try to bring medical cannabis experiments. So from the start, the first session was 10th of October 2018. And the experimental trial was actually approved in 2019, but then there was the pandemic, so everything stopped. And then in reality, so I was the first clinical trial that they pretend to make that was on one patient, so it was just like a case study, so not a real experiment. And here we go. So from 2019 to now, 31st of March 2021, where the actual official declaration with the Ministry of Health, Minister Véran came and declared he went to university hospitals and say, okay, now we open up the trial, where the aim is to reach 3,000 patients, will be on 2 years basis. And the particular thing is that they only allow 5 pathology. Epilepsy, the treatment support for oncology, neurological pain, resistance to all existing treatments. So if nothing works, then you can actually maybe be candidate, neuropathic pain in multiple sclerosis, and palliative care. But the thing is that next to it, they put some criteria that if you have any prior antecedent, like heart failures or blood pressure, whatever, that could risk or something with a psychiatric, then they will discard you directly. So it makes the selection very difficult. Plus, on top of it, doctors don't really know how to handle those demands. So to avoid the paperwork and the unnecessary bureaucracy, they just say, no, you're not, your profile doesn't fit in the program. Which means that today we only have like 300 patients that are inside the program. So of March, it's about like 5 months. It started, so only 300 patients. Actually, the first delivery of medical cannabis was oil tincture from Tilray. It came in April 2021, so just after the declaration. But big failure. Their batch, they are descending. There was some issue with the dropper, bottle were leaking, so the whole batch went back to the manufacturer. So until now, no batch have been replaced. And now, just lately, middle of August, Aurora finally introduced the first batch of medical cannabis flower. And 2 weeks ago, the mighty from Stork & Baker was allowed as medical device because they are allowing the experiment only on vaporization, of course, which makes sense. So now they have the combination. So actually now it's going to start. But the thing is that if we keep this regime in 5 months, only 300 patients, by the end of the 2 years, we will actually get the 3,000 patients. So it's quite questionable how fast and how far we're going to go with this experiment, because even lately the person in charge of this whole experiment was saying that we have to take our time, we should not rush. So they are not even trying to actually go and try to get a patient on board. So they are just putting it, let it be, and they go with the flow. But 2 years will go quite fast. And at the end of the day, we are talking about 3 million patients that could benefit to medical cannabis. And while there is this experiment going on, which is great in a way because it's opening the door, in the meantime, patients don't have any medicine, and basically for them, they are still left at the same level as a criminal, as if they were smoking weed in the street. So the point that we don't have an official recognition of medical cannabis in France as a patient. So if you are a cannabis user and you get caught by police, it doesn't matter. Then you will have to deal with judge. But nowadays they just keep the topic. If you have a small amount on you, they give you a fine, and yeah, you're good to go, in a way. So there's a big problem because there is no training of health professional, because then nobody wants to prescribe, nobody wants to help their patient. Then there's nobody educating the police that they should watch out, that there could be people, like if he's on the wheelchair and he says for medical use, then maybe you should listen and consider in a different manner. But today, this is still something out of the question, which is quite sad. Even so, there is still some possibility. I will try to go brief, basically because we are in the European community. With French prescription, you're actually allowed to go to the Netherlands, to a Dutch pharmacy, and to get your medical cannabis. But that means it's kind of a big rodeo, because you have to go to a doctor in Strasbourg. Then from Strasbourg, you have to go to Maasbracht, which is at the border with Germany and the Netherlands. And then you go back with your medical cannabis, and you have to cross the German border, the French border with all this cannabis. So it's, again, a story. And also a financial means, which, of course, not everybody can afford. So right now, best solution is automedication and auto-cultivation. So basically, in reality, for patients, nothing is really changing. So that was for the medical cannabis situation. And now I'm going to switch to another phenomena, which is also quite interesting, that's happening in France, which is the Cbd industry, which I also have my piece of the puzzle in this story. Basically, in 2014, I came up with a product called Canavape. So it's a vape pen, electronic cigarette, with CBD and a little bit of terpenes, and we promote it as hemp vaporizer. And the problem is that the authority didn't understand anything about this product. They saw cannabis, they said we are promoting something illegal. So 3 months after this official national communication, I got the police at my company. And so since that time, so it was like February 2015, I'm in the court with French government, so I will come back to it after it, because they had some different episodes. Last one was at the European Court of Justice, which you probably heard in the news. But just to come back a little bit before, so after 2015, there was the phenomena of CBD. So at the time, the flower was not yet there. And in 2018 came the flower, so first CBD flower in Paris came to open. It was like a huge phenomena, people lining up in front of the shop, and the neighbors were complaining there was too many people going there to pursue their CBD. So the Mildeca, after that, seeing that and didn't know what to do, they kind of published an official declaration. So the Mildeca is the Mission interministérielle de lutte contre les drogues et la toxicomanie, les conduites addictives. Basically, it means that they are aligned with the prime ministers to give the recommendation about how to go and fight against drugs and addictive behavior. So here we go. So they just to finish on this one, they basically say you can have e-liquid with CBD, but you cannot have any THC, which is quite funny because I was doing this trial with the French court with Cannavape. So the story with Cannavape, after first court sentences, we made an appeal, and in the appeal, we actually asked to the judge to ask the European Court of Justice about what's the statute of CBD, because in the law, nothing's mentioning about CBD. So there was a big dilemma on how to actually judge this case. So the judge were brave enough to actually ask that question to the European Court of Justice, and from there, it came up quite in our favor, saying that actually, because the product was manufactured in Czech Republic and we were importing to sell it in France. And they basically say if a good is legally produced in its country of origin in European member states, it can be legally exported to another member state. So in that case, the activity that we had was completely legal, and they also specify that you can use all the part of hemp to produce the CBD, because this is also something huge, especially in France, where they are talking about that if CBD cannabis can be used, but only fibers and seeds. So there, they actually, in Europe, it's allowed to use the whole plant to get CBD product and to legally trade it. So that's on the justice side of the things, which make it right now possible for people who produce a CBD-derived product legally in their country of origin in the European member state. It can then, by following these procedures, actually go and enter the French market, even so there's still no official way to register the product, which is that kind of funny, because since 1 year now we are starting to see supermarkets selling CBD oil, CBD capsules, CBD chewing gums, regardless novel food, regardless even food supplement registration. So it's a little bit funny. Now France is actually trying to apply for a new law. This law will, they are saying it will allow all CBD-derived products, but they will forbid the flower. And which is another big question, because obviously all the CBD shops are in France. We have about 1,000 CBD shops in France, are mainly selling flowers, and on top of it, all tobacco shops, 70% of tobacco shops in France, which is about 14,000 shops, are also selling CBD flower like crazy. So there is going to be other court case against the French Parliament, because obviously it's a lot of money, and there is no special regulation as we have Luxembourg, Belgium, Switzerland. It's a little bit a special case, but Luxembourg and Belgium, you can get your CBD flower legally. And just to finish on this, after that Cannavape story on the European level, Slovakia legalized CBD, because until May 2021, CBD was illegal like THC in Slovakia. So thank you very much for your attention, and we can ask more questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm actually coming to tell you a very different story. I'm here from Johannesburg, South Africa. I was born and raised there, and I'm here to tell you that Africa loves cannabis, and cannabis loves Africa. About 6 months, I have many investments in the cannabis industry, which you'll actually see at the end of the presentation, some of what I'm up to. But at the beginning of this year, we started a cannabis investment fund called Silverleaf, a cannabis and hemp investment. And I reached out to some international companies. One of them was JuicyFields. And they said to me, come over to Europe. And now I'm working to help them come into the region.
Green button.
Technical challenges.
Yeah. Oh,
There we go. Okay, so JuicyFields, for those who don't know, it's a very innovative platform that is basically working with e-growers and raising funds and then deploying those funds into different countries around the world. We've just recently brought them into South Africa where they've invested in a cultivator, and they're facilitating offtake agreements and global trade. Why is South Africa or Southern Africa so interesting? Besides the fact that 1 hour from my house is the birthplace of humankind, the cradle of humankind, we also have a long history with cannabis. We have landrace strains, which some of you may know, Durban Poison, Swazi Gold, Malawi Gold. This plant has been in Southern Africa for hundreds of years. In fact, when the Europeans arrived there in the 1600s, it was already there being used by the Khoi, who are one of the First Nations, a very old people. They call it, every country has its colloquial name for cannabis. We call it dacha, which comes from their language. And don't throw anything at me, but South Africa is actually the reason it was prohibited in the first place. It's a very interesting and important market, and I see here we also have somebody from Zimbabwe. They have a stand here, and I'm going to throw some little-known facts at you. One of those is that Bob Marley in 1980, when Zimbabwe got their independence, he came out and he sang the song, legalize it, and that was 40 years ago, and here we are, it's finally happening. So South Africa has 60 million people. We have a usage rate of cannabis of about 10%, and Interpol 20 years ago said that Southern Africa is producing a fourth of the world's illicit cannabis. Recently in 2018, we decriminalized the plant, and that was through the Constitutional Court, and the government was given 2 years to legalize it. Obviously, COVID came, and now we are stuck in no man's land between decriminalization and legalization, and it's becoming very problematic because another one of these little-known facts, we have almost 1 million people that are living off cannabis. So it's a subsistence crop in a region within South Africa, obviously supplying the illicit market, but people have been educating their kids off the proceeds of their little patch of cannabis that they've been growing. Southern Africa is an amazing region to grow in because of our climate. We have 9 months of sun. We have virgin soil and many unfarmed, many pieces of land that are unfarmed or have never been farmed. And we have a lot of knowledge and experience with this plant going back for generations. It's also a very good market to incubate in and to cultivate from. So in terms of actually where we're positioned in the market, New Frontier Data, I met them recently, and it's exactly what you would expect. Like in other industries, tobacco and cocoa and sugar, Southern Africa, or Africa in general, will become a very low-cost production area. We're also able to grow THC in the ground for biomass and extraction legally. And what do we believe the world is really looking for? I think it's 4 things. It's quality, and we've been producing quality cannabis for generations. It's compliance, and licenses have been issued. I'll speak a little bit about our situation there in terms of GAP and GMP. We have all of that with our licensed producers. It's obviously the price point, and I think, and I can say this coming from the bottom of Africa, I think it's going to be a race to the bottom for the price point as flower and as biomass, as long as we can meet the quality. And then the fourth one, or the fourth leg of the table, is consistency. Can we consistently deliver that quality at that price? And I believe we can. As you can see there, the biggest shipment of legal cannabis around the world has just happened out of Southern Africa. Another little known fact is that there's something called the South Atlantic Anomaly, and that occurs in South America and in Southern Africa, where we have very high levels of UV. Now, THC rises if your UV is very high. So that strain that you see there called Cape Kong was grown in Cape Town, naturally occurring 28%. And there's also a dirty little secret in the cannabis industry that it's not very eco-friendly. That takes a lot of power to do indoor grows, and the power consumption in the cannabis industry is very bad. In 2015, there was a TED talk about it, and they said there's a move to sun-grown cannabis, and where better to do that than in Africa. Medically, our health regulator has scheduled cannabinoids as an API and a scheduled substance. Schedule 0 means your entire package has to be within 600 milligrams, and that's sold over the counter at any stores. So we have stores in shopping malls selling CBD products. Above 600 milligrams is Schedule 4, you need a prescription, and then THC. Well, THC isn't really even available as an API yet because we have no registered medicines with the health department. So there is no local market, there's no medical cannabis cards and any of that. But the health department has issued 30 licenses to cultivators and manufacturers, so it's only an export market, which concerns me a lot. Then this is another little known fact, is that South Africa is part of PICS, and we are able to produce finished product pharmaceuticals for export to anywhere in the world. Obviously GMP manufacturing facilities, and we have a very mature infrastructure around pharmaceutical production. So right now, I think it sounds like it's happening in many other countries. There is a battle between the people who want cannabis to be free and the regulators who want to control the pace and who want to control what's available. So we formed the Cannabis Trade Association of Africa, and we have a number of associations that are actually taking the health regulator to court. Why is it only 600 milligrams? Why is it not part of the medical training? And we're still stuck in no man's land. And unfortunately, in South Africa, things are a little bit looser than they are here in Europe. So we have a lot of people growing because our constitution and this ruling actually allows anyone to grow at home, and wait for this, as much as you like, as long as you can justify, am I making hemp socks, or am I making medicine for an elderly patient, or am I consuming it myself? So it's almost like there's a free-for-all happening in South Africa at the moment. In terms of how we grow, we have small facilities which will scale up. We have very big multi-span farmers who come out of the strawberry industry or the blueberry industry that are now moving into the cannabis space. And it's already happening, what I'm saying, because if you go and see Pure Holdings, they have an African strain of CBD flower from a farm in Cape Town that has a license. The one on the bottom right there is a very sophisticated, bespoke built facility that's a greenhouse construction. The farm that JuicyFields has invested in is going for these blackout tunnels, very sophisticated, complete climate control, but using the sun. And then that farm that I told you about that gets the THC at 28%, they're actually growing, yes, that's beach sand. It's growing in beach sand, and they're getting incredible yields, like 400 to 500 grams per plant. What else is happening down there? As I said, everyone is growing it. All my friends and you name it, people are now excited about being able to have access to the plant, and they're growing it. There's CBD in everything. We even have CBD on pizza, CBD at coffee shops in little sachets that you can put in. But our health regulator came out recently in a parliament discussion with the cannabis community to say that cannabis has got no nutritional value. Now, this is the health regulator on record saying that, which is ridiculous. And there's an explosion of products. We also have some innovative products like inhalers that you use for asthma that are loaded with either THC or CBD cartridges. And we have multiple formulations, some of them even including African botanicals and African traditional medicine. Everyone knows Chinese traditional medicine. We also have a very high biodiversity in South Africa. These are the stores that I spoke of. So we have stores in shopping malls around the country, in the big cities. You see the Polo logo there, Polo and Cannabis. It's quite strange to see that. But yeah, it's a big market, and we call these cannaporiums. They have smoking lounges at the back, and we believe they will be the dispensaries of the future. There's also a court case happening right now in September for the legalization of the club model, very similar to Barcelona. And there's already about 50 clubs that are out there. And I do say, come visit us. Cape Town is beautiful. We make very good wine. And soon you'll be able to hopefully sample some craft cannabis from Africa. In terms of the lessons that we've learned as an emerging market, it's been very interesting to bring two worlds together. So you have the activists and the stoners who are very familiar with this plant, and then you have the professionals in the suits who now have to kind of work together to professionalize the industry. And it's also, I think some of the previous speakers have spoken about the fact that it's a picks and spades. Those are the guys that are making the money at the moment, selling grow equipment and selling irrigation and all of those things, not only to the home grow industry, but also to these licensed cultivators. And it's very much a consumer packaged goods industry, and it's about building brands, and that's what we're doing. But building a brand, as I'm sure you know, takes time, it costs a lot of money. And we're saying that we should be leveraging the strengths and the story that we have in our region, and I'm sure it's the same in Colombia. You have to look at what do you have that's unique to what the world might want. Our biggest bottlenecks are access to capital, which is why we started our fund, as well as extraction. So everybody's going to be growing, but where is the stuff going to be processed? And the same in the hemp industry. So decortification facilities need to be built as quick as possible if we're going to have these huge fields of hemp. And my final slide, I know we're on time pressures, is these are a few of the global lessons that I've learned having worked with JuicyFields for a few months now, is that it's not a harmonized industry. Medical cannabis is very complicated. A lot of these licensed cultivators that think they're going to be exporting into Europe, not so sure that's that simple. We are also looking at Australia and Israel as target markets for the supply from South Africa, but there are a lot of suppliers that are coming online. Malawi, Zimbabwe just issued 57 licenses. Lesotho is they were the first in Africa to issue the licenses. They're very mature infrastructure. And it's all about the regulations and the market maturity and the customer preferences for your country. So for example, in Australia, vapes are not allowed. The whole vaping industry is switched off there. So, you know, what delivery mechanisms are they going to use in Australia? In South Africa, we have a wide range and wide access to them. But for me, it's all just how do you get cannabis into people's bodies and on their bodies, and how do you supplement the endocannabinoid system? We wanted to see it as widely available as possible. And the biggest issue that I see in the industry is that the prescribers are not behind it. So the doctors, and we're hearing that in all these other countries, the doctors are not trained about the endocannabinoid system. They are not supported, and that needs to change. And there's a lot of movement in that arena in South Africa. I know it's happening in Germany as well. And then the social stigma around cannabis, I think that is also changing. The illicit market, recreational, and in Canada and the US is still a huge, huge component. I think 80% of all cannabis sales in Canada are still in the illegal market, because why would you go and get it at a legal place when you can buy it cheaper, a very similar product on the illicit market? And we're hoping that recreational opens up soon in South Africa, which I think it will. There's a full national cannabis master plan, and the government is really getting behind it. They've realized that this, could be a whole new industry, and we're trying to work with them to make that happen. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I'm actually from the south part of Switzerland, from Ticino, but I've been working for the past 3 years on a project in Colombia. So all of a sudden I'm here representing Colombia. I'm going to go fast because we also still have to have a little bit of a panel discussion, but just going into the regulatory framework, the advantages of growing in Colombia, licenses, and export challenges. I think there are big similarities with what Jeff has been presenting us with South Africa. And just as a conflict of interest, I do work for a company there called Plena Global Holdings, which owns a company called Cannabis SAS, but I will try to be independent besides that. So just as a first question, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word Colombia? This is just an experiment. Think of Colombia, let's see if I can get it. People usually go for the narcos thing. The truth is there is a very bad image, unfortunately, and there's been a lot of violence. This is no longer the case. And that is why, so that was really the 80s more. Right nowadays, the government has tried to introduce laws so that they can take advantage of the production of controlled substances, but in a regulated fashion. So it's an attempt to decriminalize and regulate rather than prohibit completely. And already in 2017, there's been a decree that was approved. Unfortunately, this decree did not contemplate the idea of selling the flower as a final product, but it did set the limit at 1% for THC for hemp, just like in Switzerland and Uruguay, and unfortunately only a few other countries. We know in Europe is 0.2, 0.3 in the States. So there is some kind of tolerance and some kind of wanting to open up a new market. And under this pressure, because we know that the flower market is still a huge market in the global market, this July, so the 23rd of July of this year, the president of Colombia signed a new decree that will allow to export flower, and we're expecting before the signature, after the signature, it has to be implemented, and obviously things always take a little bit longer in South America, but we are expecting that to be operative by Q1 2022. And what are the advantages of growing in Colombia? So first of all, it's because you are on the equator, you basically don't have the seasons. So here we always rush, or at least I was running a company in Spain before working in Colombia, and everybody starts to get really nervous in March, and when are we going to transplant? And then we want to transplant in end of April or beginning of May, and usually 2 days after you transplant, you get a freezing 3 days, so your entire strategy falls apart. But we are really very focused on that season, and then we harvest end of September, or depending on the variety, a bit earlier or later. In Colombia, you have the advantage that you can produce cuttings, put them in a vegetative stage, so you can give them 12 hours of light, natural sunlight per day, and in the vegging phase, you have to give at least 6 hours of extra artificial light, but then you bring these plants any month of the year in the greenhouse, and they start to flower. So that really gives you a lot of flexibility, and obviously we are also talking about very powerful light. We often have about 2,000 par of light at 11 a.m. if it's not a cloudy day, right? And so this is resulting, so these are photos of Plena, so the project I've been managing. It's about 2,600 meters above sea level. Colombia has really all kind of climates. You go from the coast, from the Caribbean beaches, to Medellin, which is, they call it the city of the eternal spring, because it's always 23 degrees, to here, 2,600 meters, it freezes at night often, so we are below zero of a few degrees. I think that's actually good to have a cold climate at night. It keeps away a lot of the pests and prevents a lot of the problems. But you can really grow, this is really seas of green. In this case, we are talking about 7 hectares of these high tunnels or shade houses, whatever you want to call them, very easily with no particular problem there. And also, if you want to go for the premium flower and potentially try to export to Europe, then you have to grow in a closed environment, in a high-tech greenhouse. In this case, it's a Richel. But setting up and then running the operation is relatively simple. A farmer in Colombia is very happy with $800 a month, so that makes it, the gameplay is a little bit different than when you're trying to grow in Europe, for sure. And getting back to the sustainability also, we are using very little amount of electricity compared to other countries. Who are the major key players? The big ones are already public companies. You might have heard of Clever Leaves. They did a SPAC this year, so they're now on the NASDAQ, or a market cap of 224 million, but revenues below 3 million, just because it's very difficult to export in this stage. Then you have Chiron, which is also moving here in Europe and doing stuff in the UK, Farmacielo, more Canadian focused, and Blueberries, which is still at the very beginning. You see a market cap of 14 million, so not really a big company there, but there are over 1,000 licenses already granted, and but only 50 of them are really well financed, so more than 1 million. And there is a Colombian association of producers, of licensed producers, called asocolcana.org, if you are interested into seeing it. And what has been the major challenges? So, of course, if the law only allowed for the production of derivatives, so extracts, distillates, purified compounds, if you want to enter the countries where all those financial plans that were really generous, showing we're going to sell hundreds of millions by 2021, and meanwhile it's not really happening, it's because quality is the issue. I mean, to enter Europe, to enter a German pharmacy, you need to be inspected by EU GMP, and even Clever Leaves, which was the only one that achieved it, was approved by Croatian authorities, and for what I know, they are having a little bit of an issue getting into Germany. Even if it's all EU GMP, you still have to apply for a marketing authorization in each country, right? So that's really a little bit the major problem here. On the other side, there's been also a lot of I think, activities for protecting the local markets. We know that Canada, Justin Trudeau, made it a political statement that he's going to create jobs. And obviously, if you want to create jobs, you're not going to import the cheaper product. You're just going to try to export your high added value product. So when you ask for, in Canada, for an export license to Health Canada to, for example, export flower to Germany, it takes about 3 days to get the permit. And when you try to get an import license for commercial reasons, we are still waiting after a few years. So there is really no hope on that side for the moment. So what are the challenges there in the entire region? So you might know already that Uruguay was the first one to approve a law in 2013. But meanwhile, we have Peru, Ecuador, Argentina. Everybody's moving in different directions. Mexico also wants to regulate adult use. They have been in the process. It's partly approved, but things take forever. And we've seen it also in Uruguay between the parliament approving the law and the products really being available for patients. It took 4 years, and actually many of the products are discontinued, even in countries that have these kind of laws, a little bit in the line of what Viola was telling us before. There are, I think at this stage, more opportunities on a local level. So the idea of getting into Germany, into the pharmacies faded away a little bit, or maybe it will be stage 2. But obviously, countries like Colombia and Uruguay are trying to export to other countries such as Brazil, which now will allow the prescription of cannabinoid-based medicines, or it's slowly moving into that on a compassionate use for the moment, and then it should move on, and they still don't have a cultivation. So this is more like creating local synergies, which I think is a very important step before you want to go to a German pharmacy, which is the ultimate graal, no? The holy grail of getting into pharma. Maybe you should be able to do your local GMP and do some practice. It doesn't really come into the entire package directly. So this would be, at this stage, we've already seen Italy, we've seen France, we've seen South Africa, Colombia, and now we would like to open up a little bit the panel discussion with our esteemed guest. I, on purpose, did not show you the next slides, just to keep a little bit of the grilling effect and the experiment online. So this morning I went on Google Trends, because the title is Trends, right, in the cannabis community. So I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is a system to check what people are searching. And while this is really very small, we can see that over the past 90 days, cannabis has been searched mostly in Canada, with Puerto Rico and United States, and this really changes very, very quickly. And the most interesting queries, or the most searched, not interesting, I would say, like where is the National Cannabis Festival, where are the opportunities, there is a cannabis conference in Las Vegas. So this is what people are searching, which I think is always fascinating to have a look at, because that's really what the volume and the numbers are all about, rather than my fancy bar charts and whatever financial plans I've been seeing over the past 20 years. And also interesting, when we go from cannabis to medical cannabis, then the situation changes dramatically. And number one is no longer Canada, but Jersey. They just changed the law, so people are interested, and this is a very small population, so the numbers, they explode quickly. And again, Canada is still in number 4, but we see that there is a different topics, the strains, biology, Tilray Pharmaceuticals. That's a little bit what's going on there. And I think this is worth mentioning, that Canada really has an unsold stock of 1.1 billion grams, and you see the sales of that little line down there, while the rest has been overproduced in a quality that not necessarily is what people want. I have friends on Vancouver Island that have only 100 lamps, and they have their crops sold until the end of 2022. They're just craft growers doing small batches, high quality, that people really love. And while those billions of dollars that all went into a rush produce volumes, because the graphs otherwise they are all there, and they're being destroyed, apparently. 1.1 billion grams. Meanwhile, And I share the sense of frustration of dear Viola. The patients in Italy are like, there's no supply. So this is really a little bit the world upside down. And this is, again, the holy grail. I've been seeing business proposals, business plans for as I said, 20 years now. I'm going to take over the German market because the German market is growing. Not really the case. There's 10 tons a year to be imported, more or less. Yes, it is a nice market, for sure. We should definitely be proud in Europe of what Germany is doing, but it's not this skyrocketing thing that everybody from Africa and everybody from South America should be starting to grow because there is no supply. That would be at least my opinion. And obviously, I would still focus on the local supply and then build up and then see how you can bring innovation and ideas out of that. Also because, let's not forget, it was already mentioned by Viola, the International Narcotic Control Board, those people in Vienna that even with the recommendation of the World Health Organization took forever to say something about CBD. And we are still under that 1961, which I call sometimes the definition of Jurassic Park, that does not allow us to export for anything different than medical and scientific reasons. So adult use, I don't think, is going to be soon under the radar of exporting my recreational stuff. Obviously, I'm talking about legally. Then I don't know what's going on with the rest. And so this is a little bit just to put a few points on the table. We've seen today, and this is very interesting, Sébastien has a master's degree in agronomy and has a lot of experience. We've seen people are trying now to use genetic markers. So is that interesting, not interesting? We see there are new cannabinoids. People are talking about CBG is the next. Others are saying THCV is the next. While synthetic cannabinoids are now taking over, especially from pharma. They prefer it. It's more stable. There's no pesticides or whatever residues. And biosynthesis. Every month there is someone new that does it from yeast, from tequila, whatever processes. And they're going to take over the world. They're going to make the billions of the billions of the billions. So far, I haven't seen so much, but correct me if I'm wrong, please. And last but not least, also using the expertise of Viola on that one. What about how patients are consuming? What about, do we have innovation in the methods of administration? What about dosing? What about bioavailability? We hear, again, on a monthly basis, someone new has a patent on nanotechnology, but that changes things or not. So maybe this is interesting to hear quickly the opinion, and after that we will also have some questions and answer managed by our panel. But maybe, Viola, you want to break the ice, ladies first, again, so you're going to hate me today. But having heard also the experiences, I think very interesting, the legal fights in France, but slowly, and the entire European countries benefiting from it, and Colombia and South Africa. What is your opinion? And maybe let's first have a quick round in that direction.
Okay, it's a very vague question, so you're
Yes,
like
and you only have
me
2 minutes.
Perfect.
No,
so one thing I can say, like bringing the experience, for example, from Italy, is that in medical doctors, the thing that they like to prescribe the most, so the 85% of prescriptions that we have are oils. Why oils instead of capsules? Mainly because a capsule, once you insert it into your body, you cannot correct your dose. You cannot titrate it as to what you need, right? But flowers, even though, I know this is going a little against what you said before, but like even though flowers are still very important, but a doctor is way less, even though the pharmacokinetics behind, inhaling and consuming orally are very different. And in some cases, I'm thinking, for example, acute pain, even though cannabis with acute pain, or something that you need a very short acting, ingredient, and inhaling is definitely like a good way to go. But for the way, medical doctors were raised, they like to prescribe oils. So one thing I can say, bringing these is like, in countries maybe a little bit conservative. I mean, let's not forget that we have Vatican City, in our own country. So I would say that for countries that, like European countries that are very religious and conservative, the idea of giving the same basically thing that has been brought over by mafia, it's not ideal for a doctor. So he wants to give a bottle, provide a bottle. And once the right dosage has been found, then he likes the most to prescribe that in a capsule. The issue is that if you don't get the same cannabis every month, and you don't have a continuity of care, then it becomes absolutely impossible. It's just guess work that is impossible to do than to have a capsule. Because every month you're changing chemovar, and so there is no way you're gonna know, okay, that capsule with that amount is gonna be perfect for the patient. Sorry, was that going in a direction you liked? Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Maybe, Jeff, you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so I'd like to just make 2 comments. At one of the previous panels, I heard somebody say the words lifestyle and wellness. And I think that's a big component that's missing from the narrative around cannabis. So at our Cannaporium, we call them the green side, we have 2 of them in Johannesburg. We have a whole angle which is food as medicine. In fact, as you walk in, it says pharmacy, but with an F, food as real medicine. And part of what we advocate for there is it's all well and good taking cannabis as a medication for a wide range of chronic conditions and issues. But if you're still eating badly and not exercising and eating a lot of sugar, you're kind of just at break-even points where you're not moving forward. And I know many people that have, I don't want to say cured cancer, but they've definitely used cannabis as an adjunct therapy. And when they've gone through this whole process of changing their diet, exercising, and supplementing their endocannabinoid systems, it's changed their lives. That's the one component. And the other one, in terms of what you were speaking about, rare cannabinoids. So it's recently come to light, and it's something that I'm focusing on a lot in South Africa, is that we have African landrace strains that are very high natural, that have very high occurring levels of THCV. And there are some publications and some clinical trials that have come out that say THCV is good for appetite suppression, and it's also good for diabetes. Now, obviously, a lot more research needs to happen around that. But if it could be at some point included in foods, I mean, can you imagine a chocolate bar that actually makes you thin or lowers your appetite? I mean, it's an incredible idea. So I think there's a lot going to happen in the space around rare cannabinoids and hopefully around lifestyle and wellness.
Absolutely. Sebastian, you want to?
Yeah, actually, I completely agree with what Cliff said, because the issue we see with medical cannabis is too much bureaucracy, too much people from another time with conservative idea. And by the time those people moves, in the meantime, there's a whole industry. So in France, the CBD is making the way, and Cbd Industry is putting flower in front of the people. I mean, today you go to France, anybody who go to a tobacco shop will see the cannabis flower in their eye. There will be the oils. So there is already all the different range, which obviously could be beneficial for medical cannabis in a different way, of course. But the product itself is the same. So it's a tincture, it's capsules, it's the flower. There is also the vaping part also. So I see that all these new wellness and lifestyles from the CBD is a little bit changing the public opinions. And by the time medical cannabis will be available, I believe that the population will be more knowledge and will accept more those products. So
I like to add something on this, because, for example, one of the things that I do is training medical doctors, and of course, that's on prescribing cannabis, but cannabinoids are just like a tiny little way in which we can modulate the endocannabinoid system. And you just mentioned wonderful ways that should be the first steps. For example, if you get a massage, your levels of anandamide are going to increase. If you go for a run, we always said that we have the runner sides done by endorphins, but that's actually a mix of endorphins and endocannabinoids. So cannabis and cannabinoids, and it's amazing you mentioned it. I think just yesterday we were talking about viridins and THCV for metabolic disorders. On point. But this is again first understanding the plant. I would say well beyond the cannabinoids. I mean, well beyond the flowers. Upstairs, I became crazy because I've seen some capsules containing canaflavin, which is flavonoids that are absolutely unique to the cannabis plant. So it's a little pharmaceutical industry inside a plant. our job is understanding what it has and how do these things work and how we can use them. But I think at the same time, it's very important for us, the more we let society understand the endocannabinoid system as a pretty much fundamental physiologic system, then not even cannabis, it's part of like a much bigger scenario that is honestly for everything that I consider true medicine, which is preventive medicine. Because once you start to work on a disease, really, you're already late, kind of thing. So, yeah, sorry, but thank you, because it was a very nice prompter on the importance of knowing the endocannabinoid system.
So on that point, I'm hoping that somebody soon will launch an endocannabinoid test that can see, because medicine is becoming more and more personal. In fact, when I was in Mexico, I met somebody who's doing a DNA cannabis test. So they take your DNA and they analyze how you metabolize cannabinoids. Are you predisposed to paranoia, schizophrenia? Which strains may work for you, which strains you should avoid. So I think the future is personalized medicine. And if we start to see that around your cannabinoid system, I'm not saying, obviously I can't make the claims, but we may see a reduction in chronic illnesses that are caused by a deficiency in the system. I know that the medical fraternity is only starting to learn about what the endocannabinoid system is and how it works, and hopefully that's the case.
I completely agree. I see they're giving me all kind of signs from the back, because we also have to respect the time of the translators, which are doing an amazing job. I wouldn't even
But
want
I like to close and say that we have this.
Yeah.
We can measure the levels of Pha, and we know that there are point mutations between all of us. So some of us, that's why they need to implement cannabinoids from an external source like cannabis.
Absolutely.
Because we just have more Pha working.
Yes.
Okay, but that's a long story, and
Absolutely.
I think
but and just my last comment before I give it to our beloved moderator, I think after a pandemic, we all need inner balance. And if the endocannabinoid system is about homeostasis, we really all need a bit of wellness, not just, of course, the patients first, and of course, medical. But who doesn't need a bit of inner balance those days? I think we can all agree. Right? Yeah. It's good prevention, so let's look at it as a positive potential for the future. Thank you so much.
Hello, I am your inner balance.
hey, welcome.
Hey, that was really awesome. Thank you all. It was really stunning to see your presentations and getting a little bit closer to the topic. So you have mentioned it before, Stefan. We have to keep in time because the job of the translators is really hard. Some of you have listened to them and you will realize that this is a tough one, especially when I'm talking that fast like in the beginning. So I would like to open the round for questioning. If there are any questions out of the audience, you can just raise your hands or your cameras. Okay. Any questions? Don't be shy. No questions? Okay, then we go on with your questions.
Of course. No.
I think that's the best, and I will give you another sign.
I'm rambling.
As soon as
if people are still interested, we can maybe have a last round. So we've been talking about the opportunity.
I will give you another sign in about 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Now maybe again, Viola, you're going to be the.
Okay. I'm just going to tell stories randomly on novel cannabinoids. For example, I am very fortunate to work with people that just in these past couple of years found out these 4 new cannabinoids, THCB, THCP, CBDB, CBDP. You might have heard of THCP because I got a message actually a few weeks ago from one of these scientists, and he's like, oh man, I thought I was doing science for helping patients and stuff, but I found this forum online of all of these people from the States that are, I don't know how, they isolated THCP, and now they're describing their how is it the trip with THCP. And he was really worried because, for example, THCP, he tested it on pain for animals, which could have a lot of potential because it's apparently 10 times more psychoactive than THC. But at the same time, he was very concerned of, wow, we didn't get to the point of really understanding this compound, and I'm seeing a forum full of people that are self-testing it. So I think, one of the issues that we will need to go through is that as science, fast forward and progress, at the same time, this can create issues. Like I think you brought on the slide as well, hyperemesis syndrome. That's, in my opinion, been due for a lot of high concentrated extraction and like a sort of not very well modulated use, because maybe you're just, for example, I'm thinking about the North America, you don't get anything from a pharmacy or a medical, I mean, there is a medical doctor at some point, but mainly you are just talking with a bud tender at a dispensary. So, yeah, man, like, yeah, it's going to be good. How much quantity?
I speak Terpenese.
Yeah, I speak Terpenese, you know. So then really you can get issues. So even though this sounds very Catholic from my side, but I think it's important as well to remember that this plant, it's an amazing plant, but also has properties that are narcotics. And the moment we start to play little gods, something can backfire, basically. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So just picking up from that, then is it not a case of dosing correctly, knowing what the different cannabinoids do and what your, which strain and what product you're looking at, and then labeling and packaging correctly? I mean, we've got that now in South Africa. We're in the kind of, I don't want to say illicit market, but because everyone's able to make their own products and grow at home, people are experimenting, and they're giving their neighbor, oh, you must try these, and without labeling it correctly and without putting it into secure packaging so that pets and kids don't have access to it. So I think that's a big component of whatever happens with markets, is to do it responsibly and to do it with education.
Absolutely. I can just jump in very quickly on that one. Sorry, Sebastian, for breaking the order, but I see it in every project I've been working, that there is always so much, plant cycle is 3 months at least, and every time you want to improve it, but that always goes away from standardization, so then it goes away from quality, so then we don't know what we're using. But those are really the real problems, and after so many years of an illegal market, quality control is really the heart if you really want to go into wellness. I strongly believe in that. Yeah. Maybe, Sebastian, you want to conclude? You get the last word, and then...
Sure. Yes, I was just going to add, like, as Viola mentioned, there's like so many different compounds in the plant. Something we didn't talk is terpenes. Terpenes is also a big part of the cannabis. That's what actually makes you choose because of the flavor. And this is also coming into food and beverage. Here I saw some drinks that were using some terpenes. It's also now the interaction also with foods. For example, chocolate produce that has an andamine inside. So like people have feeling good after chocolate is because again above the cannabinoids. And now we see a lot of CBD with chocolate. So it's very funny to see that how all the different compounds from cannabis are going, whether we want it or not, into our food, into our diets. And I believe that if we start to use all the compounds from the plant, we might be a little bit better.
A little bit more homeostasis.
Yeah.
And it's a whole new flavor profile.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I had a funny story when I went to Prague, and I bought some lollipops and things, and nothing happened. So I bought more, and I tried it, and still nothing happened. And then I realized what they were selling was the new taste experience. And coming from South Africa, I can speak about rooibos tea, and many people have tried rooibos tea, and that's a different flavor. But a lot of the world has not experienced the cannabinoid flavonoids and things that you're talking about.